again. Another chat or another update on where we're at the firearms situation in Western Australia and growing into Australia. For those that don't know, we've had very aggressive, oppressive Firearms Act brought in, something that is very clearly designed. The more you read it, the more you understand it, the more you follow it through, designed to disarm the population of Western Australia to the largest degree in a complete fashion. It'll take a few years with what they've set up, but that's what they've designed. It is something that now, more and more so, as much as a lot of people were aware of it, but more and more so, they're seeing that it's coming in all around the country. There's some states that are being more staunch about things at the moment, but the same scenario is coming where the right people get in power that want to do this, and it will happen. And most obviously through the fact that when they've got so far with Western Australia, then there will be this shining example for the people that don't want firearms to say, look what they did, look what we can have. And then, like I said, you only need to change a government and you're in that position, even the states that think they're very well covered at the moment. So these things are quite obvious in some fashions for where we're at the moment and how to fix this thing at the moment in Western Australia. It's not clear to many of how to go forward at all. Is it worthwhile? Yes, it very much is. Very much there is a lot more attached to this. Firearms are the starting point of the aggressive stuff, but we're already seeing massive movements into whether it's the farming or the fisheries that are being attacked at the moment, but whether it's your four-wheel driving or your car enthusiast or whatever it is, licensing in so many different fashions. And of course, other freedoms, be it the surveillance networks that are being set up by our police and by our government, to the shutdown of free speech with social media controls, so many things that are coming in so many fashions. And I suppose that moves into a couple of angles. I've got some positive stuff as some thoughts or suggestions that I'd really like people to at least consider, groups to consider all over the country. These are ideas that can be used in things, and I will bring it up, but I want to go through a little bit more of where we're at to start off with, in a bit the psyche of where the shooters and dealers and gun folk of Western Australia are at this moment from my perception of from my perception of things. There is a fair bit of, there's no one that thinks it's a good idea. There's some groups and organisations that think they are in a better position or can weather the storm, or they'll be okay, that I really get the feeling of. The largest degree is a case of, well, we've tried all this sort of stuff and we've been trying for over a year now and we haven't got anywhere, so nothing's going to change and we just have to make the best of what we've got. Do understand that the police and the government have been coming at this for 30 years. So when we put a year in and haven't got any changes and are going to get disillusioned, well, it's not very well. It's not a very mature aspect to or take on the situation. We're in the long haul now. There is going to be no immediate fix. This is a long haul to fix things that should have started a lot longer ago, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't start now. There's also a degree of, I think, denial, where there's dealers and things that are, we'll just make and do of things. So we'll just make do. We're making it work and we'll keep going forward. There is definitely the fact they've been beaten into complying with everything. It's too hard to not comply because they'll get targeted through that. The police have been doing that with dealers for a lot longer than they've been doing it with firearms owners. But that doesn't mean you can't do anything, and just going quiet and then complying with every law that comes in and doing nothing else, well, that's not going to win either. There seems to be this denial about the fact of, if you read the laws and what they've done to stop people having firearms, stop people using firearms, limit them to X amount, make it very, very expensive and difficult for people to get into firearms, I can't see how there's going to be more than 1,000 or so firearms sold a year in Western Australia in the very near future. So to consider there's going to be more than one gun shop able to survive on that level of gun trade is foolish. I can't see how they can do that at all. You can't charge $1,000 a gun so you can end up where you've got enough money to run one business. And by limiting the way firearms are used in so many different senses, then, okay, that takes it down to where your hunting ammunition, that sort of stuff, is largely stopped being used. There's very little business with what they've got set up and in plan. So this is obviously by design. This is now hearing more from mainstream articles and things like that, talking about the policy of Australia, Western Australia, to disarm the population. It has been put forward as that in various places, not about safety, not about community safety, not about sensible control, gun reform, that sort of stuff. Very much about disarming. So these are things that are coming, and I'm not seeing people waking up to what is really just around the corner. At the moment, there's gun safes being sold, and there's people repositioning and setting themselves up for the future with the firearms they can. So there's business and trade that's happening, but this is soon to dry up very, very quickly if things are stuck to where they're at, or the status quo keeps going as we sit right now. My logic on it, from reading what's happened in other places to the fundamentals of what's actually in play here, is that there needs to be pushback in various fashions. Now, that does not just simply mean go and break the law or do any of those sort of things. This needs to push back in all the fronts that we can. Certainly, positive PR is something that should have been happening a long time ago, and it should be happening right now. I struggle to understand why it hasn't, but I have got some suggestions for that. Some positive push into our community to let them know that guns are part of our community. To the vast majority of Australians that don't know, because they've been brainwashed largely, but they've had a lot of propaganda to tell them the opposite. But even to our own, building up our own self-esteem, our own feeling and connection with the other groups. I suppose it does come into something I would say is, when I understand the fight in a bigger picture, then we've always said, we always know we've got to be a larger group of people. Just firearms owners by themselves aren't enough. It needs to be attached to four drivers, farmers, fishers, you name it, bushwalkers, parents, people interested in free, all the things that our governments are pressing need to get together in some form or other to push back. But then the firearms owners, in all honesty, are the smelly cat. We have had the worst propaganda put against us in a very real sense. And so no one really wants to side, no other group wants to side with the firearms owners, not because they think we're bad people, not because they're not necessarily interested in firearms in some form or other, much more because they don't want to tarnish any worse their image because they're struggling as well. So anyway, I do have some suggestions coming up as to how to remedy that, some positive PR. The other side of things is the legal side of things. There should be legal side of things in fashions that are actually, even if they're not able to be fully seen through to fruition, where it can go all the way, if it can go into where there is money behind it, where it can turn into something that actually creates some pressure. What we've definitely seen at every time something reasonable happens, like the protest that happened, like the rally that happened, like in any other form where there's a large enough noise, letters from lawyers, all that sort of stuff, the government does get nervous. They get nervous just because they're nervous people. They get nervous because they're not as solid on the ground as you would think. They're not as well set up as you would think. They have a big bluff game going on to some degree or another. And there is cracks in that dam that potentially we can open up. But we don't open it up by hitting one little bit and then waiting to see what happens. It gets to heal over there. It gets quiet and heal over there and don't need to worry about it. So we need to work out a way to keep on pushing, to keep them on the back foot and to keep them where they're reacting and they can't step forward. At least to get into the next election cycle to turn it into something. Now, I'm not saying that if we simply vote for another party, this is going to be better. No, I don't believe that's the case. But once you get into the place where you've made it enough of a point and another party goes in to bat for you because they want your vote and you're a large enough group, then that does change the demographic of it. Can we trust another party if they get in there? Listen, not at this stage. But if we do enough building our community together to say this really matters, then potentially we can change it in the fashion of we change what the parties are actually standing for. That's a long conversation. It doesn't mean that you can vote your way out of this by any means, but it does mean that the election and the election process and the politics are part of the cure. So, and that moves into the other side of things, and that is basically where we get us all working together as various ways of pushing back, whether it's the legal side of things, whether it's positive PR, whether it's protest, it's sort of civil unrest at the very beginning of it, that side of things, where we're actually pushing into things. So whether that's just talking about articles in newspapers or that's talking about other things that we can do, it's all up for everyone to come up with the suggestions or come up with the strategies to push forward. And as I've said previously, everyone needs to be on the team of doing something about it. If you're not on the team of doing something about it, if you're just looking after your own little backyard and going quiet, well, okay, I understand the philosophy of it. It's a not easier process. It might have a little bit of sacrifice to it, but it's an easier process. But in actual fact, you're just helping them. You're helping them get their goal, because that's exactly what they need. Go quiet and they're going to get their way. So what have I got in the way of suggestions of things that we can do? Or thoughts, more thoughts of things. Obviously, there's been several before, and there are people talking at writing articles. There are people talking at doing some forms of video content to get on and do that side of things. I am putting together a paper. It's building. It's at, I don't know, 100 pages or so now to go through the clinical review of what actually happened in this with the Firearms Act and what's actually happened to build it, what it's about, critiquing it and that sort of level. Fairly scary stuff if you go through and look at the finer details and really start to put it on paper. I'll get to that when I'm done building it, so you can review it as well, or people can. But the first suggestion I've really got, it comes into the positive PR that I have tried to put together a few videos, that sort of stuff, tried to push into the SSAA, try to push into Shooters Union, tried all over the place. Can we do something? Can we do this sort of stuff? No one really wants to pick up and run with that sort of stuff. When I follow it through, my simple logic there was put some positive firearms owners having fun in all sorts of fashions, so in all the different genres that we do, to put it forward as a bit of an ad campaign. Social media, mainstream, whatever it is, a bit of ad campaign, not to sell firearms, but to sell our sport. And of course that would be difficult, of course that would take a lot of money, but the bigger issue that I put it to, if you stop thinking just firearms, then you have to realize that that would be very hard sell to get it out there. But what about this take? What about a similar to the G'day from WA promotion series that was, I don't know, 40 years ago, whenever it was? Positive sort of feel to it. Definitely was a nice thing to happen and listen to and that sort of stuff in the 80s, I think it was. It was more about selling, I think, West Australia to the rest of Australia is what it's about, but it actually turned into very much about building up West Australia for West Australia. What about the same thing for Aussie culture? What about the same, whether it's Aussie weekends or the Aussie way of life, or it's basically an ad campaign that, once again, it is about selling Aussies to Aussies. So it's actually showing what you really think the Aussies are. So whether that's beaches or it's four-wheel drives or it's the desert or it's tennis or it's cricket or it's shooting or it's four-wheel driving or it's farming or it's headers or it's mining or it's high-vis shirts, it's all the bits and pieces. Really friendly, really happy, what it means to be Australian. And in there, almost subliminally, a couple of, occasionally, whether it's just a couple of seconds of, but firearms related things. So something that attaches us to everybody else and lets them know that we're there, but it's also about being, whether it's a sunburned Aussie, it's the things that I'm sure even the people that sip their coffees in the cafes in the middle of the city, in some form or other still feel that being Australian means you're part of being this person. Part of being this, the sunburned Aussie, the country, the red dust under your fingernails, that's part of who we are. That's part of what the world thinks we are, but sell that to ourselves. And in there, like I said, in a fashion that is not, it doesn't need to show a muzzle blast, it doesn't need to show anything of the firearms, it does show using your four-wheel drives, it does show, in a very proud sense, just little snippets of the fact that, yeah, we use firearms as well. Something as the beginning of a letting Australians know that we use it. This isn't a terrible thing that we're talking about. This isn't shooting people with firearms. This isn't a scary thing. Just in a very small way, bring it in as part of what we do. That would take an advertising campaign that once again would start in a social media presence, but try and get it into a mainstream thing. Dollars involved. It would cost a fair bit, and it's something that I suppose I would touch base on and say the GoFundMe side of things. I think people are a little soured to that. Not that any of those things haven't been trying to do the right thing, and potentially not they're going to turn into the right thing. But to ask for money for something that might happen is no longer really working. No longer is something, I think it's gone fairly sour, that thought. So it would need investment to make this sort of thing happen. So it is something via some entrepreneurs, some people prepared to put some money in to show something good. And then if it starts to work, then we say, okay, this has already been spent on. Do you want to chip in as well? Then a crowd funding process to keep that sort of thing going on. So you're not doing for something that could be, you're doing for something that is, and you want to be part of it. So that's one thought as a positive scent, a positive advertising campaign for all of the freedoms that we want to keep, with a little tiny bit of firearms in there. So it just is the beginning of like I said, almost subliminal in the fashion of a image in there that actually starts to push back, and some positive propaganda that we can get everywhere. Okay. So that's the first thought I've got. The next one I've got is a little more in a legal sense. I don't know if it can actually be used properly, but it is a logical argument of coming into the rights thing. I went through the process of, do we have rights? What rights do we have? And there's people who will go to the Magna Carta, the 1688, and there's the natural rights and God-given rights and all that sort of stuff. There's all things, the more you understand of it, the more it goes into the human rights, international side of things. It's a bit of a toothless dog that's used to threaten governments and that sort of stuff, and it can happen in various places, but it's very unlikely to be used. And so whether it could be used as an actual legal strategy or it's used more as a political strategy, but there is what our laws, our constitution and our laws are all basically founded on in Australia, and what our government stands by. And that is, there's a few of them, but one of the things it stands by, like it's what underpins our laws, is basic human rights. One of those basic human rights is the right to life. So the right to life is supposedly one of our basic laws. So basic rules, basically what underpins our laws. In the right to life is the right to defend your life. The right to defend your life is part of the right to life. That is a worldwide, that is an inalienable rights, human rights, God-given rights, all the different ways you can say it. It is the basic principle of being a citizen of this world, the right to life. And that means the right to defend it. And I would point out, the moment you disarm someone, the moment you take away and make sure they cannot have a firearm, you have in some senses, well, in all senses, but in some situations, you've removed the right to defend your life. So this is a different thing than castle law, which is not actually about giving you the right to do something. It's the castle law is a good thing to come in. We sort of, I think, have it a little bit in Western Australia, but it is that it gives you, in most conditions, not all, but in most conditions, you have the right to defend yourself to the level that you've been attacked. So it means that you, what it actually means is you have legal defense. If you kill someone or hurt them badly, but you're defending yourself, then the castle law gives you the right to have done that. It doesn't actually give you, it's more on the back edge of thing, more covering you legally than it does the other way around. So the other way around, meaning, why can't I have a firearm to defend myself? Now, this thought comes from, we have this whole strategy in Western politics, but more Australian politics, that we have all these bad men that are, and these women that are always being done wrong by and unalived by these bad men. What's the greatest equalizer there is in our world as it stands today? That would be for a young lady to be able to be armed because she's in fear of her life. So that would mean that's actually talking about the right to self-defense. That's talking about carrying a firearm to defend yourself. So that's a big tangle. I understand completely that side of things. But if you follow that thought through, then okay, how would you fix this an inequality of the bad things happening to women? Well, you could arm the women. That would fix the problem. Then they have the ability to stop that. And of course, that doesn't mean they go around killing people. It means they have the right to, they have the ability to defend themselves. People don't belt them up if they've got a gun pointed at them, that sort of thing. So you can actually follow that right through to the right to defend your life. And how can you defend your life if you are not armed to be able to defend your life? Waiting for the police to come, the only way you can do it legally now, if it's going to happen, no, they're just going to be there to take the photos at the crime scene. They're going to be there to try and work out what actually happened afterwards. No one is able to defend your life if you are outnumbered and outpowered and someone means to do you lethal harm. So there is actually, in disarming, anywhere in the world this is actually, but there is actually, if you have been disarmed, you've had the right to defend your life removed, which means you've had your basic human rights have been compromised. So as to how that can be played, I know that's a long, it's a long draw on the bow there, but it is a very practical, straightforward process that does say that has happened. Another one that is probably even more controversial, but it is something that's more and more into the headlines now. I hear once again, federally, and I think even state-wise, but certainly federally, I've heard Port Arthur brought up as the victims of Port Arthur, the tragedy of Port Arthur, and it used as political leverage to get what the anti-firearms people want. What a lot of people don't realise is it's only last year, or the year before, I think it was, it went from a 30-year sealing of all the documents, all the records, where they were sealed for 30 years. And that means they were supposed to be opened up so we could see what actually happened in Port Arthur and actually find out what actually happened. That was 96, so it was 26 or 27, whenever it was going to be opened up. Well, just prior to that, that's now been resealed for another 75 years. So now, if you watch the good man's work at the WASP files, you'll see, if you've been watching that sort of series, you'll see a lot of what's going on. There's books written about the fact that there's a lot of, let's not go to the conspiracy theory for this moment. We don't need to press the buttons there. There is a lot of what potentially has happened there in the way of which is nothing like the narrative of what Port Arthur was. There are lots of things that don't line up there, that without any question. But all that side of things, okay, there could be, let's just give the benefit of the doubt and say there could be some real scenarios that makes it look sus, but in actual fact it was this. It turns out the most sus part of that whole process is to seal it again for another 75 years. That is the obvious smoking gun to the fact that something was really, really wrong with what was put forward and what was explained and what actually happened. That is really, really, really says that there's some guilt involved. But let's not go conspiracy side of things. There is a couple of paths forward. There was a petition put forward a few years ago, I think in 2020 or something like that. It only got to just under 9,000 signatures. I don't think it was shared very well. It got to 9,000 signatures, so it didn't go any further. But this would be to have the documents unsealed, what would be the e-petition was for, or the petition was for. I presume it was an e-petition. But it needs to get to 10,000 so it goes before Parliament. My thoughts would be along the lines of, there definitely is, the more you understand about what happened at Port Arthur, of what has actually come out afterwards, and lots of bits and pieces are very, let's just say sus. Very, very, very suspect of, they're not, what we've been told by the government narrative is not the same as the facts that are on the ground. But, like I said, let's not go with the conspiracy, let's go with, as a gesture of good faith, let's get it unsealed, or if you don't want to unseal it, you're no longer able to use it. You can't use it as a sledgehammer to bash things down when we don't even know what actually happened and you're not prepared to share it to the level of it's been resealed for another 75 years. And no, you can't use the grief of families and all that sort of stuff to seal things for 75 years. This matters about all of Australia, and because your objective matters more than what the people's objective want isn't a good enough thing. So, if you can't unseal it, then push for it no longer being used. It's not allowed to talk about it again. Okay, let's go with that. I don't think it's very honest. I think it shows a lack of good faith with your citizenry, or however you say that, your people. You don't care enough to tell the truth, but that you lose the power to be able to use that in any form of legal or political power when we don't actually know what happened, because it could be as much a sign of the things that went wrong for what were done to us as what it is about what went wrong to the people that were there. So the e-petition, if it gets over 10,000 signatures, it has to go before Parliament. But why not have something that has, this is pretty serious, a fair few people woken up. Why not have 200,000 signatures or 1 million signatures to say, listen, no, we now know out of recent incidences that our government isn't exactly telling the truth about very, very important things. This one here would be a very good one to move forward. Let the chips lay where they lay. Let the people that should take consequences of what actually happened, that happen. And maybe there's, listen, I won't go any further down that road. Once again, this is just a thought. These are things that potentially we as the firearms community in some cases, but as the community of Australians, and yes, a lot more of the eastern states, like I said, are waking up. This is much more from the eastern states when it comes to Port Arthur. But a lot more of it get on the side of, okay, it's time to do a bit of a reset here. And there's a point where you're definitely covering up something, uncover it, and we can maybe move forward from here. Repair some bridges, build some trust back, and move forward again. That would be a really good thing. I find very little hope of it happening. So maybe it turns into a political message, which is, okay, if you really can't share that, that means that we really have as big a problem as we fear, and maybe we just start deal with the problem anyway. Anyway, that's that one. I'm always open to suggestions, by the way, if I can share them for you. The only thing I would say about the average suggestions, which suggests how I can do more, me and Sam can do more. We really are doing all we can. We really would like to get other people doing things. I'd really much rather be saying, listen, these guys are doing this, and these guys are doing this. I'd much rather be able to put it forward and use the channel to be able to promote things and say what everyone's up to. That would be a great thing. But anything we can do to try and get people working together, to get people working up, to maybe even sort out some of our crazy shooting organisations into the fashion where they're starting to work for everybody rather than for themselves, and get everyone working on the same page would be a wonderful thing. But anyway, we'll keep at it. You keep at it, please. Please don't give up. Please try and find a way to go forward. This does matter. This is about your future, but more so your kids' future, and more so their kids' future. This is where this lays. This is what's going wrong. This is changing their world massively, and it's not going to fix it by people sitting there saying, "Oh, listen, I'll just deal with it, and I'll just do this while I can, and I'll find something else to do later." No, that's not going to work. And your gun dealers, everyone, you can help in other ways. You can get involved in other ways. You don't need to break laws. You don't need to even be obvious about what you're doing. But please start to be part of saving your future as well as ours. Anyway, guys, thank you very much. Thanks for checking in. We'll catch you next time.